Welcome to If These Walls Could Talk. I'm your host and super CEO, Lindsay Liu. Joining me today is Matt Snyder, the founder of Managemax based out of Michigan. Matt specializes in the management of condos, HOAs, housing communities, and working with portfolio-wide investors. He has a long background in real estate and as a property and asset manager. Today, we'll hear from Matt about one of the more horrific realities that property management teams have to deal with. And trigger warning for those listening, as this episode does contain some descriptions of violence. So Matt, welcome.
Hi there. Glad to be here.
Let's start from the beginning. So you mentioned to me this was a time when you were working at a condo management company. This condo was looking for a new community manager and you were asked to step in. Lucky you. What did you walk into?
Well said. Yes, indeed. So the story is that I was a community manager at the time and working for condominiums. And my company had been working with a condominium association for a period of time. And my predecessor, who also worked for my company, was on the clock prior to my arrival. And this board, who oversees the condominium association as a volunteer group, experienced a situation where they were confronted with a scenario that they didn't know how to work past. And the unfortunate facts of this, as you said, were that it was a violent situation where the resident of this condominium unit was an adult son of the former owner. And that former owner passed and deeded the unit to his family, and the adult son took residency, and the adult son apparently was not well mentally and had a girlfriend and ended up getting in an argument with the girlfriend and killed her inside the condominium unit. And to complicate the matter, as if that wasn't bad enough, no one knew what happened to this woman. The police didn't know. This person apparently didn't have any close family members. And as a consequence, the body that was part of the crime was left in this residence unit. And the resident took this down into the basement and attempted to dispose of it piece by piece through dissolving it, cutting it. And only after 7 months did a family member stop in to check on this resident and found these body parts in the basement. Obviously, the police were called at that point in time. The resident was hauled off in front of a court to jail, never to be heard from again. As a consequence, no one was paying the bills on this association unit. So from the association standpoint, who my company worked for, they had a vacant unit that was part of a tragic situation and had stigma attached. The condominium board was not aware of what are the steps that they need to take to turn this into a functioning, occupied unit that's normal and healthy for the community. And neighbors were also struggling with that, the stigma of living next to a community home that was attached to this tragedy is not an easy scenario. So about a year or so after this situation happened, I transitioned in as community manager, replacing my predecessor who also worked for my company. And one of the first things I heard at the meeting was someone said, we're talking through a litany of other issues, and someone said, oh, and by the way, we have to deal with the murder house. I said, the what? And they said, the murder house. I said, why don't you define for me what that is? And so that was my first introduction. Your
predecessor had never told you?
That's the first I heard of it, yes.
The first you heard of it. Wow.
Right, just sitting at the meeting, as just casually, and we have to deal with the murder house. My predecessor didn't tell me what it was. I just showed up, and then the first meeting, it's like, oh, and we have this. so
like, hold on. This
sure.
Can't just be an agenda item bullet. Okay. Wow.
Yes, exactly. That was the scenario. So it was wild. So I had to ask some questions, and I said, what is the murder house? And they said, well, the murder house is, and it was basically a shortened version of the description that I just shared. And I said, okay, well, what are you doing about that as a community to remedy the situation? And your job as a board of directors is take this situation and make it better. So why don't you define for me as a board what you're doing along those lines? And they said, we're not doing anything. I said, why? And they said, because we don't know what to do. We're stuck. And so I have an experience, as you said, in real estate and done a lot of foreclosure work. So I'm familiar with actually what to do in a situation where we have a violent situation. How do you recover from it? What is the cleanup process? What is the sale process? And so I walked the board through the scenario and said, what we need to do is first go in and determine what's going on. And I confirmed that the board did actually go through the foreclosure process. So they actually, in our state, Michigan, where this condominium is located, the board had actually gone through the foreclosure process, which takes about 6 months, give or take, and got the property back. So the unit was now owned by the condominium association. And so we had a right to go into it. So we got authorization to drill out the lock. So we got a vendor to drill out the lock, walked through the community unit to determine what it was that was actually going on in there. There was the grisly crime scene was no more. That was just gone, as though it had never occurred. So someone had cleaned that up, who I didn't know, and I didn't ask to this day, but it was just a vacant unit with a variety of personal property, rotten food, refrigerators and all that. And so I had to go through that with a vendor. We got some understanding of what we had to do to get that property turned around. We advised the board. They approved that we would proceed. We went ahead and we recommended that they clean it out, remove all the stuff, and that if there's any items that need to be done beyond that before we sell it, we do those things and then get this property into the real estate cycle as quickly as we're able, which means putting it into the hands of a qualified real estate broker who would then sell it as a vacant unit normally. And the board went for that. And as we got into the clean out process, we also tested the plumbing system and found that the corrosive chemicals that this former resident had used to dissolve this body that they had in their basement had damaged the plumbing system as well. So that was another gotcha situation where we had to adjust, and we recommended to the board an additional work scope where they went ahead and got that plumbing system squared away as well. So we're advising the board, and fortunately the board is listening. There was part of the job as a community manager is to make sure that your community board trusts you, they understand the expertise, they think you're leading them well. You put them in position where they feel like they can follow you with some degree of confidence. And in fact, that's the relationship that I quickly developed with this board of directors. They really wanted to get this problem behind them, and credit to them, they followed our lead. So we got that done, got this property in the hands of a real estate broker, and then we further advised the real estate broker to communicate with the board of directors, and we had talked to the board of directors and told them what were the disclosure requirements with respect to this and other situations within the community unit. It was a foreclosure unit, so the disclosure limits requirements are a little bit more limited than they would be if a person was to be selling their individual home. Long story short, went through a negotiation process with several buyers, and the condominium association ended up selling this unit to someone who came in as an investor, got the property cleaned up, and re-rented, reoccupied, and the stigma gradually faded away. So it was a big process to get that done and to lead everybody along. And it was not easy. You know, neighbors were outside trying to confront prospective purchasers, as I understood it, and try to tell them the story of what had happened. And so we really had a lot of headwinds going against us, not only the stigma from the board standpoint, but also the stigma from the surrounding residents standpoint. But we got through it. That's the good thing, and this condominium association got a good amount of money for this unit, and it's behind them. So it was a big deal.
That's a really big deal. Yeah, I mean, I think, boards get stuck on a lot of things. I can't imagine, and multiple time board member here, you get stuck on little things. for them to try to figure out how to navigate a situation like this must have been really, really taxing. It must have been emotionally really difficult for them to deal with as well. I know I would probably want to resign through something like that. So I think they're very, very lucky that they had good stewardship through that. Although it sounded like it took a few months for them to get somebody that
It,
was able to wrap their head around
it,
how to deal with
it
it.
did. And, one of the things along those lines is just why would someone let this situation just fester as a community board when these people were predisposed to actually wanting to fix it, but yet they didn't do it? And it's because they either didn't know who to trust, or my predecessor didn't take this seriously enough where they said, we're going to take a risk and we're just going to push forward and we're going to try to help this group through this situation. And one of the things that I found, not only with this situation, this is just one of many examples that's along these same lines, of course, not as tragic, but these community boards they want to do things that are good for their community, but they really don't know how to trust their management company. And part of the job of the management company is to come in with a firm belief of what to do. And you share that in a strong way with your community and the leadership team. And then it's up to that leadership team to say whether it believes the management company based on the relationship. Do they think that that management company has been there, done that? Or are we just talking in theoretical terms about, well, on paper, this should be the way it works? And so I really had to come through and just tell these people, in this situation, I really do know what I'm doing, and just jump on my back and I will carry you forward across the finish line. And it was just amazing just to watch the fear that was really in their eyes and on their face, and the confusion that was in the room. It just faded away almost immediately when I came with that kind of mentality. And the condominium associations that I worked with and have worked with in the past really do tend to rely heavily on the management company to come with that strong viewpoint. And if you don't know what you're doing as a management company, you should at least be able to advise your client boards how you can connect them with someone who does know what they're doing, like their attorney or like their insurance agency or like a vendor, for instance, or even the municipality. The city oftentimes will have great resources for condominium associations, and they want to help. So I just came in with a strong sense of what needed to be done. And this place just really needed that kind of push.
Yeah,
And that
they
kind
needed
of,
to move forward from the
yeah,
situation.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it
Um,
was,
you mentioned that some of the neighbors were trying to gossip with potential buyers, which is frankly horrible. Were they, can you clarify for us if you heard if they were like fellow HOA neighbors or kind of neighbors across the street somewhere else?
oh, sure, sure. So these were actually HOA members in the, they were almost like, they didn't even think about like, hey, I'm shooting myself in the foot by coming out of my house and just telling everybody about this story. Like if you're out there in the dating world and you're going out into a nightclub, do you want to tell somebody, hey, this is, by the way, I'm dressed up really nice, but, I have this terrible characteristic that you should definitely want to know about. No, you don't do these things. And that's where this association was really confusing me. It's like, why would you be doing this? Aren't you trying to get a neighbor? Isn't that the goal here? Or are you trying to do something else? But you know
Interesting.
what? Even I think these people may have been taking their cue from the HOA board, because the HOA board was actually calling this house the murder house, as I said in the beginning. Like, that's not a constructive narrative to be putting forward if you're trying to resolve a situation on behalf of your residents. And so a big part of that was I had to talk to the HOA board and tell them, you as a group need to lead your community. This whole situation of labeling this home in this derogatory way, I have a tendency to believe that your words are going to go farther than this room. And so why don't you consider adjusting your thought processes so that it's a little more, you're presenting the situation in a little more objective tone so that your residents, if they're predisposed to maybe hearing you, if they ever hear you talking or in passing, that they'll be hearing you and just understanding that this is nothing more than four walls and a floor and a ceiling. And so let's dial down the rhetoric. And we did talk, well, I talked, and my vendor who was working on this cleanup process and the plumbing repair and prepping the property for resale also spoke with the residents and said, you're really not helping your community by coming out of your house. The best thing you can do as a resident is at least keep your mouth shut. And if you feel like you have to talk to someone, then go out in the woods and just say whatever words you want. But don't come out of your house every time someone comes into the place to be looking for potentially living in your community as a neighbor here. You want to be welcoming, not scary and counterproductive to what we're all trying to do for your benefit as well.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I mean, you mentioned, having a strong point of view and kind of bringing that guidance and expertise. What would you say as far as managing communications in a scenario like this and how important that is?
well, that's a really great question that you asked there. The one theme that I really tried to emphasize in this situation was a single point of contact. And that's one of my strong beliefs. Now, why is that important? Not only here, we'll deal with this one here, but also from a broader standpoint. So a single point of contact is important in this situation because messaging is everything. If you have someone coming out of their house and they've got something to say, and you've got another person coming out of their house, they've got something to say, and then you've got board member A, B, C, and D, and E. Every one of them has something to say. You know what people are looking for? They're looking for that smidgen of information that may be slightly different. And so in this situation, we needed to really control the messaging. Like with the real estate agent, I made sure that the board nominated a single point of contact. I told them view it like a funnel. Say whatever you want to say inside your meeting, but one point of contact is going to be the person who's going to be speaking to all outside parties. That includes real estate agents, title companies, mortgage companies, potentially residents. If residents have questions about this particular issue, that one board member should be the person, and none of the other board members should ever say anything. That's important in this situation because we really needed to control messaging. As I said, messaging was really out of control. And when you have minimal disclosure requirements, as you do in the state of Michigan, you don't have to disclose in a foreclosure situation the history of a piece of real estate, which real estate, has history. Humans have tragic situations which occur inside pieces of real estate, but that stigma shouldn't occur. So messaging was super, super important in this situation. And it's also important because I needed to be able to focus my efforts, and I didn't need a person coming in from the right side and from the left side, everybody having a different set of instructions for me. I needed to be clear on what I was doing, and I also needed to advise them clearly. And so in general, I find that boards, they all want to contribute, which is just a great, great characteristic as a volunteer group. But when it comes to messaging, if everybody has something to say to the outside world, then messaging gets very confused. So we've got to be able, as a community management company and as a community, to make sure that we're having excellent communications between board members, but then in terms of who communicates that message to the outside world, that can't be all of you. That has to be one of you. And then another board member can, for instance, take the next issue. But that way you're speaking with one voice. I'm clear on what I have to do, and everybody else is clear out there supporting your community on what they need to do to support you. And the messaging is super, super clear. So that's really the big focus that I had here in terms of messaging for this group.
Yeah, I love that. Obviously, the game of telephone is how rumor mills get started.
Excellent.
But I also say, I think about it a lot from my experiences with boards. It a lot of times is like a school project. And so you do have to delegate one person to lead, or else it doesn't get done as one. I think, you kind of inherited a board that was a little paralyzed around
Yeah.
what to do here. And so, kind of making sure that everyone understands their role and how they're contributing to that larger goal is a really important part of pushing things forward.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Having a designated point of contact, and just it's got to be varied. You can vary it around so one person doesn't get overwhelmed, but you're absolutely right. The democratic aspect of communication is wonderful and making sure that everyone communicates. But when you have multiple people, everybody wanting to contribute, you get into trouble with that mixed messaging that ends up getting out into the world.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I will say, given these experiences, the fact that you've struck out and continued in property management is a testament. And I feel like these are the stories that, a lot of times folks don't know that there's people behind the scenes like a Matt, right, that are really
right.
helping communities to deal with these situations and going through things that are, not easy even for you, right, to deal with as well. So thank you so much for sharing
Absolutely.
that story.
Absolutely.
If anyone wants to learn more about you, more about Managemax, how can they get in touch with you?
Sure. So it's https://managemax. That's MANAGE.properties. Managemax properties. And go right in there. We've got books available that we've written on the subjects of condominium associations, housing parks. Even we've broken it out where we've got books on how to manage distressed condominium associations and distressed housing parks and even single family homes. We've got books on all these things. So take a look at our resources page as well. You can learn a little bit about how we think as a company. And if we can help you, your community, your board, by all means, we'd love to do so. So reach out to us in that way.
Thank you so much, Matt. And that's today's episode of If These Walls Could Talk. Super is the AI powered communication and workflow tool for property managers. To learn more about Super, visit us at www.hiresuper.com. To share a story you have for a future episode, email us at hello@hiresuper.com.